Okay, we are off on in the next couple videos modeling demand in a market demand for a product. First, we have to define how demand is modeled. And demand is modeled using a demand curve. Okay, and a demand curve is simply a graphical representation of a list of all quantities of a product that are desired at different price levels. So you can imagine, well, if the price of a candy bar was 25 cents, how many candy bars would you buy? If it was 50 cents, how many candy bars would you buy? If it was 75 cents, how many candy bars would you buy? And you would just keep going, changing the price level of the product and determining how many units of that product you would desire at those prices. That range of prices in that range of quantities that you would desire, that a demand curve is the graphical representation of that schedule. The quantity demanded of a product, I missed something here. Quantity demanded of a product, however, is the exact amount desired at a specific price. So you have this list of prices and list of desired quantities with that go along with those prices. If you just select one price and one quantity out of that list, that would be your quantity demanded. Okay, what this means is that the entire demand curve then actually represents the demand for a product or service, while the quantity demanded is a point on that curve. Okay, now this seems like a very trivial difference, but it's going to be extremely important in a little bit. Now that we've defined demand and quantity demanded, let's model it. Now, if you notice in the last two definitions, there were two components that those definitions revolved around, and that was quantities and prices, okay, P and Q. And those are going to be the labels on our axes. So if you remember in the last video, we had an equation of a line, and typically an equation of a line has a y on the vertical axis and an x on the horizontal axis. This is exactly the same way, only this time we're going to put prices on the vertical axis and quantities on the horizontal axis. Now, it's at this point that many instructors and even your book, perhaps, breaks out this fictitious person, probably named Susie or John or something, and asks you, okay, at 50 cents an ice cream cone, how many ice cream cones would Susie buy? At $1 per cone, how many cones would Susie buy? At $1.25 per cone, how many cones would Susie buy? The problem is, frankly, I don't even know anyone named Susie, and no one's really going to have data at the time they need to use economics to analyze a situation. Um, if you pursue an economics degree, then you'll learn how to incorporate data into this stuff. But at this point, what we need is a practical knowledge of demand. And so I like to simply ask a student, or anyone for that matter, if prices are relatively high, do you buy more or less of something? I think most people would say I buy less of something. And then I ask, well, then if prices are relatively low, do you buy more or less of something? And I think everybody would respond, well, I'd buy more of that something. Then what you have to do at that time then is figure out, okay, what is then the relationship between the prices and the quantities that you desired? Well, that would be called an inverse relationship. Okay, inverse, if I could only write, it would be good. Let's see, inverse relationship. And what that means is that when prices rise, quantities you desire fall, and when prices fall, the quantities you desire rise. Now, how can we graph that? Well, that would be a line with a negative slope. And believe it or not, we've just modeled demand for a product. As you can see, if I start out with a price of P prime, okay, whatever that price is, $1.50 per candy bar, I would desire to purchase a quantity of that product, Q prime, maybe 2 candy bars. If I lower the price of the product, however, to P double prime, say I lower the price of the candy bars to 75 cents each, I would probably increase the quantity I desire, say to 4 candy bars instead of 2. So the price falls, the quantity I desire rises. This is important because we've just modeled demand and common sense demand as well. It has the dynamic that prices and quantities are inversely related, but we have also just modeled the concept of quantity demanded and how it's different from demand. If you remember in the last video, quantity demanded was 1 point on this curve. So quantity demanded at P prime is Q prime. Quantity demanded at P double prime is Q double prime. Okay? Now what this means is that as prices fall, I move along the curve from one point to another. In other words, I'm increasing my quantity demanded of the product. But you'll notice the demand curve does not change. It stays right where it is. In other words, if I lower the price of the product, the quantity demanded of the product increases, ceteris paribus. Remember that phrase, ceteris paribus, all else held constant? In other words, I'm holding the demand curve constant and I'm changing the price of the product. Vice versa, if I draw the demand for a product and I start out at a price of P prime, but again, this is a different P prime. Obviously, it's lower than this P prime. I start out with a price of P prime. My quantity demanded is Q prime. If I raise the price of the product, my quantity demanded falls to Q double prime. Okay, so I raise the price of the product to Q double prime. Quantity demanded falls to Q double prime. In other words, I'm moving along the demand curve in the other direction to a new quantity demanded. Okay. Now we call this this inverse relationship. I mean, it sounds obvious enough. I mean, commonsensical enough. This sort of inverse relationship. Prices are high, buy less of something. If prices are low, I buy more of something. We actually believe as economists that this relationship holds for the vast majority of products, the vast majority of the time. In fact, we believe it holds this inverse relationship between prices and quantity demanded holds so often that we actually call it a law. And simply, we call it the law of demand. And the law of demand